A dog was walking through the forest when she found something no one could have imagined: abandoned lynx cubs on the verge of death. What she did next defied all natural instincts and moved even animal life experts. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. In the dense forests of northern Montana, where winter's grip lingered well into what should have been spring, the small community of Pine Valley had come to rely on an unexpected guardian. The locals called her Shadow, a medium-sized mixed breed with fur the color of weathered bark and eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should. Nobody knew where she came from or who she might have belonged to once. Some speculated she had been abandoned by tourists years ago, while others believed she had simply appeared one day, as if summoned by the forest itself. What everyone agreed on was Shadow's uncanny ability to patrol the winding trails that connected Pine Valley to the outside world. Day after day, she would trot along the snow-covered paths, alert to any sign of trouble. She was known to guide lost hikers back to town and had even herded stray sheep back to their rightful pastures on more than one occasion. The townspeople left food for her at the edge of the forest, but she never allowed anyone to approach too closely, maintaining a respectful distance that earned her an almost mythical status among the locals. "That dog's got more sense than half the people in this town," Hank Miller would say from his rocking chair outside the general store. As the oldest resident of Pine Valley at 82, Hank claimed he'd seen Shadow's mother before her, though no one quite believed him. "She's been around as long as I can remember," replied Sarah Thompson, the 35-year-old elementary school teacher who often brought her students on nature walks, where they'd sometimes spot Shadow watching from afar. "My theory is she's part wolf." In truth, no one knew Shadow's story, and she seemed content to keep it that way. What mattered was her constant presence, a silent guardian who asked for nothing in return. Jack Wilson, the local wildlife officer who had moved to Pine Valley 5 years ago from Seattle, was perhaps the only person who didn't romanticize Shadow's existence. "She's just a feral dog with good instincts," he'd insisted, though even he couldn't explain how she always seemed to appear whenever someone was in trouble on the mountain trails. It was Jack who first noticed Shadow's absence that spring. 3 days had passed without a single sighting, something that had never happened before. "Maybe she finally moved on," suggested Linda Peterson, who ran the town's only diner. "Animals follow their instincts." "Or maybe something happened to her," Jack replied, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. "I think I'll check some of her usual routes tomorrow." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the sun struggling to warm the frost-covered ground. Jack set out early, following the familiar trails that Shadow had claimed as her territory. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, but something felt off about the Guardian's sudden disappearance. 3 miles into his search, Jack noticed unusual tracks veering off the main path, dog prints mixed with something else. His training kicked in immediately. Those were lynx tracks, and recent ones at that. Lynx were rarely spotted this close to Pine Valley, preferring the deeper wilderness where human interaction was minimal. Following the intermingled tracks with growing curiosity, Jack pushed through a dense thicket of pine saplings and stopped abruptly at what lay before him. There was Shadow curled around 3 tiny lynx kittens in a small hollow beneath a fallen log. The makeshift den was lined with moss and feathers, creating a surprisingly cozy shelter. The kittens, eyes barely open, were nestled against the dog's warm body, making small mewling sounds as they nursed. Jack froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. It defied everything he knew about animal behavior. Dogs and lynx were natural adversaries, predators who competed for the same territory and resources. Yet here was Shadow, nurturing cubs that should have triggered her instinct to either flee or fight. As if sensing his presence, Shadow's head snapped up, her eyes meeting Jack's with an intensity that made him step back. She didn't growl or bare her teeth as he might have expected. Instead, She seemed to be evaluating him, determining whether he represented a threat to her unusual charges. "Easy, girl," Jack whispered, slowly crouching to appear less threatening. "What have you gotten yourself into?" His mind raced with questions. Where was the mother Lynx? Had something happened to her? Was Shadow somehow aware that these cubs would perish without intervention? The realization of what he was witnessing began to sink in. Shadow hadn't abandoned her duties to Pine Valley. She had extended them to these vulnerable creatures who would surely have perished in the lingering cold without her warmth and protection. Jack knew he should report this to the state wildlife authorities. The proper protocol would be to take the cubs to a rehabilitation center where they could be raised and eventually released back into the wild. But as he watched Shadow gently nuzzling one of the kittens that had squirmed away from its siblings, something stopped him. "I'll be damned," he muttered, backing away slowly. This was something special, something that defied easy categorization or standard procedure. As Jack returned to Pine Valley, his mind was consumed with what he had witnessed. He decided not to tell anyone just yet, not even Sarah, whom he had been dating for the past year. Wildlife experts would insist on removing the cubs, arguing they needed specialized care. But Jack wasn't convinced that human intervention would be better than what Shadow was providing. That night, he packed a small cooler with raw chicken and beef from his freezer. Before dawn the next morning, he returned to Shadow's den, leaving the food at a respectful distance. From behind a large pine, he watched as she cautiously approached the offering, sniffed it thoroughly, then carried pieces back to her den, piece by piece. "I'll help you, girl," he whispered. "Whatever you're doing here, I'll help you." What Jack didn't notice, as he made his way back to the trail, was the pair of golden eyes watching from the ridge above. The eyes of an adult female lynx with a distinctive scar across her flank. The mother had returned, drawn by some primal connection to her offspring, but held at bay by the unfamiliar scent of the dog, and now the human who had entered the equation. The delicate balance of this unusual situation had just become even more complex, with nature and instinct pulling in one direction and something else, something harder to define, pulling in another. For 2 weeks, Jack maintained his secret vigil, leaving food for Shadow and observing from a distance as she cared for the lynx cubs with a devotion that challenged everything he thought he knew about animal behavior. He documented everything in a leather-bound journal, sketching the cubs' growth and noting Shadow's maternal techniques. She would leave the den for short periods, never more than 20 minutes, to drink from a nearby stream or quickly consume the food Jack provided before rushing back to her adopted family. The cubs were growing stronger by the day. What had begun as blind, helpless creatures mewling weakly against Shadow's warm fur were now curious, playful beings with bright eyes and increasingly coordinated movements. Jack had named them in his journal. The largest one with distinctive ear tufts was Scout, the female with unusual markings on her face was Luna, and the smallest, most adventurous one was Ranger. On the 15th day, as Jack approached the fallen log with his customary offering, he was startled by a voice behind him. "So this is where you've been disappearing to every morning." Jack whirled around to find Sarah standing there, arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mixture of curiosity and hurt. "Sarah," he stammered, instinctively moving to block her view of the den. "What are you doing here?" "Following you," she admitted without apology. "You've been acting strange for weeks, leaving before dawn, coming back with this distracted look in your eyes." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "People are talking, Jack. Linda at the diner thinks you're seeing someone from Rivercrest." Despite the tension of the moment, Jack couldn't help but laugh. "So you thought I was sneaking out at 5 a.m. and for secret rendezvous? It sounds ridiculous when you put it like that," Sarah conceded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "But you've been so secretive. What was I supposed to think?" Jack hesitated, weighing his options. Sarah was trustworthy, and perhaps having another ally in this unusual situation wouldn't be such a bad thing. Besides, keeping her in the dark now would only create more problems between them. "I'll show you," he said finally, "but you have to promise to stay quiet and move slowly." Sarah's expression shifted to one of intrigue as she nodded her agreement. Jack led her carefully toward the fallen log, motioning for her to crouch beside him. When she peered into the makeshift den and comprehended what she was seeing, her gasp was audible despite her best efforts. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Are those lynx cubs?" Shadow's ears perked up at the sound, her body tensing protectively around her charges. She fixed Sarah with a wary stare, but made no move to either retreat or attack. "She's been caring for them for over 2 weeks now, as far as I can tell," Jack explained quietly. "I found her like this when I came looking for her, after she disappeared from her usual routes." Sarah stared in wonder at the scene before her. "This is incredible, Jack. It's like something out of a children's book." Her eyes brightened with the academic curiosity that made her such a good teacher. "Have you reported it to anyone? This could be a groundbreaking case of interspecies adoption." Jack shook his head firmly. "And that's exactly why I haven't told anyone. The moment this becomes official, those cubs will be taken to a wildlife center, and Shadow will be back to roaming the trails alone." "But isn't that what should happen?" Sarah questioned gently. "Lynx cubs need to learn how to be lynx. They need to learn to hunt, to survive in the wild." Before Jack could respond, a movement in the underbrush about 30 yards away caught their attention. Shadow noticed it too, her body stiffening as she rose to her feet, positioning herself between the cubs and the potential threat. Jack placed a restraining hand on Sarah's arm, signaling her to remain absolutely still. Slowly, a full-grown female Lynx emerged from the dense foliage, her tawny coat marked by a distinctive scar across her flank. "The mother," Sarah breathed, barely audible. Indeed, it appeared to be the cub's biological mother, drawn by some instinctual pull to her offspring, yet hesitant to approach due to Shadow's presence, and now the human scent that permeated the area. For several tense moments, the lynx and the dog regarded each other across the small clearing. There was no aggression in Shadow's posture, only cautious protection. The lynx, for her part, seemed uncertain, shifting her weight from paw to paw, occasionally taking a small step forward before retreating again. What happened next astonished both human observers. Shadow slowly backed away from the cubs, creating a small distance between herself and them, while still remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. It was as if she was communicating to the mother that she meant no harm, that she understood. These were not her own offspring. The lynx, however, did not approach. After several minutes of this silent standoff, she melted back into the forest, disappearing as quietly as she had come. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered excitedly once. "The lynx was gone. She's creating space for the mother to return. Jack, this is remarkable behavior." Jack nodded, his respect for Shadow deepening even further. "She's smarter than any dog I've ever known. It's almost like she's trying to orchestrate a reunion." As they watched, Shadow returned to the cubs, who had begun to whimper during her brief absence. She curled around them once more, licking each tiny face with gentle reassurance. "We should go," Jack said finally. "We've disturbed them enough for one day." As they made their way back toward the trail, Sarah stopped suddenly, gripping Jack's arm. "You know we can't keep this to ourselves, right? This is too important, too special." Jack sighed, knowing she was probably right, but still reluctant. "Let me think about it. Maybe there's a middle ground, someone we can trust who won't immediately call in the authorities." Sarah's eyes lit up. "What about Dr. Eleanor Reed? She's retiring from Montana State's biology department this year. She's done field work with predator species for decades, and she's been known to bend the rules for the sake of observation rather than intervention. Eleanor Reed, Jack repeated thoughtfully. I've read some of her papers. You know her? She gave a lecture at our school last year about wildlife conservation. We've kept in touch. Sarah squeezed his hand enthusiastically. She could document this properly, maybe even turn it into a research paper. This could change how we understand animal behavior. Jack wasn't entirely convinced, but he knew Sarah was right about one thing. This phenomenon deserved to be properly documented. If nothing else, all right, he conceded. Reach out to her, but be discreet, and make it clear that our priority is protecting Shadow and the cubs, not turning this into a circus. Sarah nodded solemnly. Of course, this will be handled with absolute care. As they walked back to town, hand in hand, neither of them noticed the weathered figure watching from the ridge above. Hank Miller, the town's oldest resident, who had followed his own suspicions about Jack's early morning excursions. Unlike the wildlife officer and the teacher, Hank had no scientific interest in what he had witnessed. To him, it was something far more significant, a sign, perhaps even a message, that the natural world was far more complex and mysterious than humans gave it credit for, and he wasn't the only one who would soon be drawn into the unfolding drama in the forest. The delicate dance between Shadow, the cubs, and their biological mother was about to become the focal point of a much larger circle of interested parties, each with their own perspective on what should happen next. Dr. Eleanor Reed arrived in Pine Valley 3 days later, her weathered Jeep loaded with cameras, recording equipment, and enough supplies to maintain a proper field study. At 68, with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid and laugh lines etched deeply around her eyes, she exuded the calm confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime observing rather than interfering. You understand that what you're describing defies conventional animal behavior, she told Jack and Sarah as they shared coffee at Linda's diner, speaking quietly to avoid being overheard. Interspecies adoption isn't unheard of in captivity or domestic settings, but in the wild, between natural competitors, I would have dismissed it entirely if not for my respect for Sarah's observational skills. It's why we called you, Jack admitted. I've been second-guessing what I'm seeing every day, but it's real, Dr. Reed. Shadow has been caring for these cubs for nearly 3 weeks now. Eleanor, please, the professor corrected gently. And I believe you. Nature constantly reminds us that our neat categorizations are human constructs, not biological imperatives. She took a thoughtful sip of her coffee. What intrigues me most is the biological mother's behavior. You say she's returned multiple times, but hasn't reclaimed the cubs? Sarah nodded eagerly. It's the most fascinating part. Shadow seems to be deliberately creating opportunities for the mother to approach, but something is holding her back. Fear, most likely, Eleanor suggested. Her cubs now carry the scent of a potential predator. She's caught in a biological paradox, the instinct to protect her young versus the instinct to avoid danger. So what do we do? Jack asked, leaning forward. I've been providing food for Shadow, but I'm concerned about the cubs' development. They need to learn how to be lynx, not dogs. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with interest. That's precisely why I'm here, to observe, document, and perhaps gently guide this situation toward the best possible outcome. She lowered her voice further. But we need to establish some ground rules. This information doesn't leave the three of us. The moment word gets out, we'll have wildlife officials, media, and curious onlookers destroying any chance of this resolving naturally. Jack and Sarah exchanged glances, both nodding in agreement. However, their pact of secrecy had already been compromised. Bit late for that, isn't it? The gravelly voice of Hank Miller interrupted their conversation as the elderly man slid into the booth beside Eleanor, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Hank, Jack straightened in surprise. How long have you been listening? Long enough, the old man replied, signaling to Linda for a coffee. And before you start worrying, I've known about Shadow and those cubs for nearly 2 weeks. Been watching you come and go, Jack. Sarah's eyes widened. You followed Jack too? Didn't need to, Hank scoffed. I've been spending my mornings in those woods since before your parents were born, young lady. Not much happens out there I don't know about. Eleanor studied the newcomer with professional interest. And you haven't reported this to anyone? Some things aren't meant for reports and committees, Hank replied cryptically, accepting the steaming mug Linda delivered without comment on their conversation. Some things just are. Jack rubbed his forehead, feeling the situation slipping further. From his control, Hank, this is a sensitive wildlife situation. We need to handle it carefully. Which is exactly what I've been doing by keeping my mouth shut, Hank retorted. Question is, what are you planning to do with your fancy cameras and clipboards? He directed this last comment to Eleanor, sizing her up with eyes that had seen decades of change come to the Montana wilderness. Instead of being offended, Eleanor smiled. Observe, document, learn. She met his gaze steadily. And you? What's your interest in this situation, Mr. Miller? Just Hank, he corrected. And my interest is making sure you science types don't mess up something beautiful with your analyzing and categorizing. An unexpected ally emerged from behind the counter as Linda approached, coffee pot in hand. Shadow helped find my grandson when he wandered off the trail last summer, she said quietly, refilling their cups. Whatever's happening with her and those wildcats, I'm with Hank. Some things should be left alone. Jack looked around the table in dismay. Their secret circle had expanded to 5, and tensions were already emerging about how to proceed. Eleanor, however, seemed unfazed. It seems we all have Shadow's best interests at heart, she observed calmly. Perhaps we can work together rather than at cross purposes. The unexpected alliance formed that morning at Linda's diner would prove crucial in the days that followed. Eleanor set up discreet wildlife cameras around the den area, positioning them far enough away to avoid disturbing the animals while still capturing their interactions. Jack continued providing food, though Eleanor suggested gradually reducing the amount to encourage Shadow to hunt, which might in turn demonstrate hunting behavior to the cubs. Sarah, with her teacher's summer break beginning, volunteered to monitor the cameras and maintain the observation logs. And surprisingly, Hank proved to be an invaluable source of knowledge about the forest terrain and wildlife patterns, helping them identify the most likely hunting grounds of the mother lynx and tracking her movements with an expertise that impressed even Eleanor. Linda kept their secret, occasionally packing extra sandwiches for their long observation days and deflecting questions from curious townsfolk about the unusual group that had formed. A week into their observation, the delicate dance between Shadow and the mother lynx took a significant turn. Eleanor's cameras captured the adult lynx approaching the den during one of Shadow's brief absences. The cubs, now more mobile, tumbled toward their biological mother, apparently recognizing her scent, despite their weeks with Shadow. The group watched the footage together in Jack's small cabin, holding their breath as the reunion unfolded. The mother lynx groomed her cubs thoroughly, seeming to reclaim them with her scent, but when Shadow returned, carrying a rabbit she had caught, the expected confrontation didn't materialize. Instead, Shadow dropped her prey at the edge of the clearing and backed away, her body language submissive rather than challenging. The mother lynx, after a moment's hesitation, dragged the rabbit closer to her cubs. "She's bringing offerings," Eleanor whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten in the wonder of what they were witnessing. "She's essentially asking permission to remain part of the family unit." "D. Or showing the mother she can help provide," Jack suggested, equally amazed. "Either way, it's unprecedented," Eleanor replied, making rapid notes. "This level of cooperative behavior between competing predator species simply doesn't happen." "Except it is happening," Hank pointed out gruffly, though his eyes never left the screen, right in front of us. The footage showed the mother lynx, allowing Shadow to approach, both animals maintaining a cautious distance but sharing the space around the cubs. When Shadow lay down a few feet away, two of the cubs actually left their mother to wobble over to the dog, climbing on her with familiar affection. Sarah wiped away a tear. They recognize her as family. They imprinted on her. Eleanor corrected gently. It's a biological process, not an emotional one. With all due respect, Eleanor, Jack said, I'm not sure we can be certain of that distinction anymore. The professor's expression softened. Perhaps you're right. We've already entered uncharted territory with this observation. The footage continued to show the mother lynx growing more comfortable with Shadow's presence over several hours. By nightfall, the two animals had established positions on opposite sides of the den entrance, both watching over the sleeping cubs within. Co-parenting, Sarah murmured, the educator in her fascinated by the implications. They're creating a blended family. Linda, who had remained silent throughout most of the viewing, finally spoke up. Seems to me they're doing what needs doing to keep those little ones safe. No different than people, when you think about it. The analogy hung in the air, resonating with each of them in different ways. Jack thought of his own childhood, raised by a single father after his mother left when he was 8. Sarah reflected on her classroom, where so many children came from non-traditional family structures, yet thrived with proper support. Eleanor considered the artificial boundaries humans placed between species, categories that perhaps meant less in the wild than in scientific journals. And Hank, whose silence often masked deeper thoughts, remembered his late wife and how they had raised their neighbor's children after an accident had taken their parents decades ago, a human parallel to the unusual adoption they were witnessing. The question remains, Eleanor said finally, what happens next? The cubs are growing rapidly. Soon they'll need to learn hunting skills that Shadow cannot teach them. The mother's returned, Jack pointed out. Won't she teach them what they need to know? Ideally, yes, Eleanor agreed. But will Shadow allow that natural process to occur? And what happens when the cubs are fully grown? Will they recognize their own species, or will they be caught between two worlds? These questions lingered as they continued their observation over the following days. The mother lynx began bringing small live prey to the den, mice and voles that the cubs could practice pouncing on, developing crucial hunting skills. Shadow watched these lessons with what almost appeared to be approval, occasionally nudging a cub that was slow to participate. What none of them anticipated was how quickly word would spread beyond their small circle. Despite their best efforts at secrecy, the catalyst came in the form of an unexpected storm that would test the unusual family bond in ways none of them could have predicted, and thrust their private miracle into the public eye with consequences that would ripple far beyond the forests of Pine Valley. The meteorologists later called it a microburst, a sudden, powerful downdraft that created hurricane-force winds in a concentrated area. For Pine Valley, it meant a night of chaos as the storm descended without warning, transforming gentle summer breezes into howling tempests that tore through the forest with destructive force. Jack awoke to the sound of his weather radio blaring an emergency alert at 2:17 a.m. The automated voice warned of severe thunderstorms with dangerous wind conditions and potential flash flooding. His first thought was of Shadow and the Lynx family. Despite the danger, he threw on his raincoat and boots, grabbed his emergency pack, and headed out into the raging storm. The drive that normally took 20 minutes stretched to nearly an hour as he navigated around fallen branches and flooded sections of road. When the path became impassable, he continued on foot, fighting against the wind and rain that seemed determined to push him back. By the time he reached the area where the den was located, the landscape had transformed. Fallen trees created new barriers, and the small stream that ran nearby had swollen to 3 times its normal size, consuming portions of the forest floor. "Shadow!" Jack called out, his voice lost in the howling wind. The familiar fallen log that had sheltered the makeshift den was nowhere to be seen. In its place was a chaotic jumble of debris, branches, mud, and forest detritus carried by the surging water. Panic rose in his throat as he scanned the area with his flashlight. Had the den been washed away? Were Shadow and the Lynx family trapped? Or worse? A faint sound caught his attention. Not quite a bark, but a distinctive vocalization he recognized as Shadow's way of communicating urgency. Following the sound, Jack pushed through a tangle of wet underbrush, slipping on the muddy ground and gashing his hand on a broken branch. The beam of his flashlight finally caught a glimpse of movement about 50 yards upstream. There was Shadow, standing at the entrance of what appeared to be a small cave set into a rocky hillside. She barked again, more insistently this time, then disappeared inside. Jack scrambled up the slope, nearly losing his footing several times on the slick rocks. When he reached the cave entrance, he hesitated, aware that he might be intruding on a tense situation if the mother lynx was present. "Shadow!" he called softly, aiming his light into the darkness. A whine answered him, and Shadow emerged, soaking wet but seemingly unharmed. She tugged at his pant leg, a behavior he'd never witnessed from her before, clearly attempting to draw him inside. Ducking to avoid the low ceiling, Jack followed her into the cave. His flashlight revealed a sight that stopped him in his tracks. The 3 lynx cubs huddled together, visibly shivering, but alive. Their fur was matted with mud and debris, suggesting they had been caught in rising waters before being rescued. "Good girl," Jack whispered, running his hand along Shadow's wet back. "Where's their mother?" As if in answer to his question, a low growl emanated from deeper in the cave. The beam of his flashlight found the adult lynx crouched in a defensive posture, her injured flank now sporting a fresh wound that glistened with blood. "Easy," Jack murmured, immediately lowering his light to avoid agitating the injured predator. His wildlife training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The mother lynx was hurt, possibly while helping Shadow relocate the cubs to safer ground. The cave was dry and secure, but the injured lynx posed a potential danger if she perceived him as a threat. Jack slowly removed his backpack and retrieved a thermal blanket and first aid kit. With deliberate movements, he spread the blanket on the cave floor near the cubs without approaching them directly. From the first aid kit, he took a package of beef jerky he kept for emergencies and tossed several pieces toward the cubs. Shadow immediately went to the food, nudging it closer to the cubs, who began to eat hungrily. The mother lynx watched warily, but made no move to stop this assistance. "I'm going to help," Jack said softly, knowing the animals couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would communicate his intentions. "But I need backup." Retreating to the cave entrance where cell reception might be possible, Jack was surprised to find not only a signal, but 3. Missed calls from Sarah. He returned her call immediately. "Jack!" Sarah's voice was breathless with worry. "Where are you? The storm is terrible." "I'm at a cave about half a mile upstream from the original den," he explained quickly. "Shadow and the Lynx family made it here, but the mother is injured. I need Eleanor's expertise and medical supplies for wildlife. Can you reach her?" "She's here with me," Sarah replied. "We were both worried about the den. Hank is here too, insisting on coming along despite the weather." "Good," Jack said, relief evident in his voice. "Tell Eleanor to bring her veterinary kit, and Hank might know this cave. Ask him about the old mining claims on the North Ridge." Within an hour, headlights appeared on the forest road below as Sarah's SUV navigated the treacherous conditions. Jack flashed his light to guide them up the slope. Eleanor arrived prepared, carrying a professional wildlife medical kit, while Hank brought up the rear with surprising agility for a man his age, a large tarp rolled under one arm. This cave was part of an old prospector's claim. Hank confirmed as they carefully approached the entrance. Not many folks remember it's here. Smart of Shadow to bring them to shelter. Eleanor took charge once Jack described the Lynx's injury. "Let me go in first," she instructed. "Sarah, set up the tarp across the entrance to keep more rain out. Jack, I'll need your assistance, but let's move slowly and deliberately. Hank, perhaps you could stay by the entrance in case we need anything from the vehicles." The careful choreography of their movements seemed to reassure both Shadow and the mother Lynx. Eleanor approached the injured predator with the calm confidence of someone who had treated wild animals for decades. "Laceration on the hind leg," she assessed quietly. "Not life-threatening, but painful and at risk of infection." From her kit, she prepared a sedative dart. "This is a mild tranquilizer, just enough to let me clean and treat the wound without causing her additional stress." With practiced precision, Eleanor administered the dart. The Lynx flinched, but remained in place, her golden eyes fixed on the cubs, who were now playing with the edge of the thermal blanket, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. As the sedative took effect, Eleanor worked quickly to clean and treat the wound, applying antibiotics and a protective bandage. "She'll be groggy for a few hours but should make a full recovery," she informed the others. "The important thing is preventing infection in these conditions." Throughout the procedure, Shadow remained close to the cubs, occasionally glancing at the mother Lynx as if checking on her status. Sarah documented everything with her phone, her teacher's instinct for preserving educational moments overriding the unusual circumstances. "I've never seen anything like this," Eleanor admitted as she packed up her supplies. "The cooperation between these two species goes beyond anything documented in wildlife literature." "Not everything makes it into your textbooks," Hank remarked, securing the tarp more firmly as the wind outside intensified. "Nature's got more surprises than science has categories." As dawn approached, the storm began to abate, leaving behind a transformed landscape and a changed dynamic within the cave. The mother Lynx, recovering from the sedative, allowed Shadow to remain close to the cubs. More surprisingly, she accepted food and water from Jack's hands, a level of trust that astonished even Eleanor. "We should let them rest," Eleanor suggested as morning light filtered through the tarp. "The mother needs time to recover, and they're safe here for now." And as they prepared to leave, Shadow did something unexpected. She followed them to the cave entrance, then looked back at the Lynx family before returning her gaze to Jack, as if torn between two worlds. "It's okay, girl," Jack said gently. "Stay with them. They need you." The dog seemed to understand, returning to the cubs who greeted her with enthusiastic pouncing and play-biting. The mother Lynx, still groggy but alert, made a soft, chuffing sound that was neither threatening nor fearful, simply acknowledgement. What none of them realized as they made their way back down the slope was that their nighttime rescue operation had not gone unnoticed. Tom Parker, a freelance photographer who had come to document the storm's impact for regional news outlets, had captured the unusual group entering and exiting the cave. His telephoto lens had even managed to catch glimpses of Shadow and the Lynx cubs through the gap in the tarp. By noon, as the residents of Pine Valley emerged to assess the storm damage, the first images were already circulating on social media. With the caption, "Miracle in Montana, dog and lynx form unlikely family," the secret that Jack, Sarah, Eleanor, Hank and Linda had guarded so carefully was about to become public. Knowledge with consequences that would reach far beyond their small community. The delicate balance they had worked to maintain was now threatened not by natural predators or storms, but by the most unpredictable force of all, human curiosity and intervention. As cell service was restored throughout the region, Jack's phone began to ring incessantly with calls from wildlife officials, media outlets, and conservation organizations. The peaceful observation of a natural miracle was over. Now, they would have to navigate the complex intersection of wildlife management, public interest, and the protection of something precious that defied easy classification. Meanwhile, in the quiet darkness of the cave, unaware of the human storm brewing around them, Shadow and the mother lynx continued their extraordinary partnership, bound by the shared purpose of protecting the 3 cubs who slept peacefully between them. The story spread like wildfire across the nation. What began as local social media posts quickly caught the attention of regional news outlets, then national networks, and finally international media. By the end of the week, Pine Valley had transformed from a quiet Montana town into a reluctant center of global attention. "This isn't what we wanted," Jack said grimly, surveying the collection of news vans and camera crews that had set up an impromptu media camp on the edge of town. "They're treating it like a circus." Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly as they sat in their usual booth at Linda's diner, which had become their unofficial headquarters. "Maybe we can channel this attention into something positive, education rather than exploitation." Eleanor, who had been fielding calls from colleagues around the world, nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking the same thing. The scientific community is fascinated, but there's a risk of turning Shadow and the Lynx family into specimens rather than respecting them as the unique case they are." "Damn right," Hank muttered, glaring out the window at a reporter attempting to interview locals in the parking lot. "Those animals don't need cameras and microphones shoved in their faces." Linda arrived with fresh coffee, having closed the diner to regular customers to give their group privacy. State wildlife officials called again. "They're sending a team tomorrow morning, with or without your cooperation." She directed this last comment to Jack, whose position as the local wildlife officer had become increasingly complicated. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My supervisor made it clear this is now a matter of significant scientific and conservation interest. I've been ordered to facilitate their access to the site." "And what happens when they decide the cubs should be removed to a wildlife center?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear they all shared. "Or that Shadow is interfering with natural processes?" "That's why we need a plan," Eleanor interjected, her academic demeanor giving way to unexpected passion. "I've spent my career observing and documenting wildlife. What's happening here isn't just unusual, it's revelatory. It challenges fundamental assumptions about interspecies relationships and adaptive behavior." Hank, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "My land borders the national forest where the cave is located. Access road runs through my property." A sly smile formed on his weathered face. "Might be that road becomes impassable for a spell. Tree fell during the storm. Could take days to clear." Jack couldn't help but smile at the old man's suggestion. "That would buy us some time, but not a solution. Eventually, they'll get through." "Then we need to change the narrative," Sarah proposed, her eyes brightening with inspiration. "Instead of fighting the attention, we use it to protect them." "What do you mean?" Linda asked, sliding into the booth beside Eleanor. "A sanctuary," Sarah explained, her teacher's ability to articulate complex ideas coming to the fore. "Not a zoo or a research facility, but a protected area where Shadow and the Lynx family can continue their relationship naturally while allowing for responsible observation and education." Eleanor straightened, immediately grasping the concept. A living laboratory of sorts, but with the animals' welfare as the primary concern. "I have colleagues who have established similar projects for other species." "My land," Hank offered without hesitation. 300 acres backing up to the national forest. Been in my family for generations. Was planning to donate it to conservation. Anyway, when I'm gone, might as well put it to good use now. The group stared at him in surprise. Hank had never mentioned owning such a significant parcel of land. "That's Incredibly generous, Jack said finally. Hank shrugged, uncomfortable with their attention. What's the point of holding on to something if it can do some good? Besides, I'd rather see it used this way than turned into vacation cabins after I'm gone. Linda reached across the table to squeeze his hand, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the others. There was history there, Jack realized, between the diner owner and the town's oldest resident. It could work, Eleanor said thoughtfully. With the right legal structure and scientific oversight, we could establish a protected research area that would keep both commercial interests and overzealous officials at bay. I have a friend who specializes in conservation law, Sarah added. She could help us draft the necessary documents. As they began to outline their plan, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from one of his fellow rangers. "We need to move fast," he announced after reading the message. "The wildlife management team is being dispatched early. They'll be here by nightfall, not tomorrow morning." Then we'd better get to the cave first," Eleanor declared, already gathering her things. "Shadow and the Lynx family need to be relocated to Hank's property immediately." The urgency of the situation galvanized them into action. Within an hour, they had assembled the necessary supplies and vehicles. Linda closed the diner, leaving a sign that simply read, "Family Emergency," and joined their caravan. Hank rode with Jack, providing directions to access his property from the forest side, avoiding the main road where media might be watching. When they reached the cave, they found Shadow standing guard at the entrance, her posture alert, but not alarmed at their arrival. Inside, the mother Lynx had fully recovered from her injury, grooming her cubs who had grown noticeably in just the few days since the storm. "The question is," Jack said quietly to Eleanor, "how do we move them without causing stress? The mother Lynx isn't going to willingly follow us." Eleanor considered the problem. "The cubs are the key. They'll follow Shadow, and the mother will follow the cubs. We create a trail from here to the new location using scent markers and food." As guidance, with careful precision, they implemented Eleanor's strategy. Shadow, who had always maintained a respectful distance from humans, now seemed to understand their intentions, following Jack's gentle guidance as he laid a scent trail using pieces of the blanket from the cave. Sarah and Linda carried the cubs in a ventilated carrier, moving slowly enough that the mother Lynx could track their progress without feeling threatened. The journey to Hank's property took nearly 3 hours, far longer than the actual distance would suggest. They moved cautiously, stopping whenever the mother Lynx seemed hesitant, allowing her to verify her cub's safety before proceeding. As dusk settled over the forest, they reached their destination, a secluded clearing on Hank's land, beside a small spring-fed pond. A natural rock formation provided shelter similar to the cave they had left behind, and the surrounding forest offered ample hunting grounds. "This is perfect," Eleanor observed, surveying the location with a biologist's eye. "Natural resources, protected habitat, minimal human presence." They released the cubs near the rock shelter, watching as Shadow immediately began guiding them to explore their new surroundings. The mother Lynx maintained a cautious distance, observing from the tree line, but showed no signs of aggression or intent to flee. As night fell, the humans retreated to Hank's cabin, a sturdy structure built decades ago that stood about a quarter-mile from the clearing. From the porch, they could just make out the shapes of Shadow and the Lynx family settling into their new home. "Now comes the hard part," Jack said as they gathered around Hank's wood stove. "Establishing legal protection before the authorities. Realize what we've done." Sarah's conservation lawyer friend, Michelle Ortega, arrived shortly before midnight, having driven straight from Helena after receiving their call. She listened to their story with increasing fascination, occasionally making notes on her tablet. "What you're proposing isn't simple," she warned them, "but it's not impossible either. The key is establishing a conservation easement with specific Research provisions that would make interference problematic from a legal standpoint. How quickly can it be done? Eleanor asked. Michelle smiled. Normally these things take months, but given the media attention and my contacts at the state level, we might be able to fast-track it. The real question is who holds the easement. My department, Eleanor offered immediately. Montana State University's Wildlife Biology program. We have established protocols for research sanctuaries. And financial backing, Sarah added. The university would have resources that we as individuals don't. Michelle nodded. That could work, particularly if we can get statements from reputable wildlife experts supporting the scientific value of this unusual relationship. I can have at least a dozen on board by morning, Eleanor assured her. My colleagues around the world are already clamoring for information. As the night progressed, their plan took shape. Michelle drafted documents while Eleanor made calls to colleagues in wildlife biology, conservation, and animal behavior. Jack used his contacts in the Wildlife Management Agency to monitor the movements of the incoming state team. Sarah began outlining an educational framework that could be implemented alongside the research components. Linda kept everyone fed and caffeinated, while Hank provided crucial information about the property boundaries and natural features. By dawn, they had created the framework for what would become the Pine Valley Interspecies Research Sanctuary. Michelle had secured provisional approval from key officials at the state level, leveraging the positive public attention and the backing of Montana State University. Eleanor had assembled an impressive advisory board of wildlife experts who endorsed the project enthusiastically. When the state wildlife management team arrived at the original cave site later that morning, they found it empty, except for a notice directing them to contact Dr. Eleanor Reed regarding the relocated research subjects now under university protection. The officials were initially furious, but their anger quickly gave way to intrigue as Eleanor presented their comprehensive plan. The media, sensing a positive story with enormous appeal, eagerly embraced the sanctuary concept, running headlines like "Montana Town Creates Revolutionary Wildlife Haven" and "Unlikely Animal Family Inspires Groundbreaking Research Center." In the weeks that followed, the Pine Valley Sanctuary became a model for conservation innovation. Carefully controlled observation platforms were constructed at a respectful distance from the Lynx family's territory, allowing researchers and educational groups to witness the extraordinary relationship without disturbing it. Shadow continued her role as co-parent, while the mother Lynx gradually allowed her to participate in teaching the cubs hunting skills. Most remarkably, as the cubs grew into adolescence, they developed a unique behavioral pattern that incorporated both lynx and canine social structures. They hunted with the stealth and precision of their biological heritage, but displayed the cooperative pack behaviors Shadow had modeled for them. 6 months after the storm that had changed everything, Jack and Sarah stood on the main observation platform, watching as the now nearly grown cubs practiced stalking techniques under the watchful eyes of both Shadow and their mother. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Sarah asked, leaning against Jack's shoulder. He shook his head, still amazed by the scene before them. "Never. I thought we were just helping one dog protect some orphaned cubs. I never expected to help create—" He gestured at the sanctuary that now employed dozens of researchers and educators. "All of this. Life finds unexpected ways forward," Eleanor commented as she joined them on the platform, her formal role as the sanctuary's scientific director belied by the wonder that still showed in her eyes whenever she observed the Lynx family. That's the real lesson here. Adaptation isn't just about competition and survival. It's about finding new possibilities for connection. From the edge of the clearing, Hank and Linda watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. Their roles as founding board members of the sanctuary had formalized a relationship that had been brewing for decades. Not bad for a couple of old-timers, Linda said, slipping her hand into Hank's weathered one. Figure we learned something. From those animals, Hank replied with a rare smile. Never too late to form new bonds. As the sun began to set over Pine Valley, casting the sanctuary in golden light, Shadow raised her head from where she had been resting alongside the mother lynx. For a moment, she seemed to look directly at the humans observing from a distance, her intelligent eyes reflecting something that transcended scientific classification, a wisdom about connection and care that had changed not only her life and the lives of 3 lynx cubs, but an entire community's understanding of what was possible when artificial boundaries fell away. In that moment, as human and animal gazes met across the clearing, the true miracle of Pine Valley became clear. Sometimes the most profound lessons come not from our careful plans and categories, but from being willing to recognize and protect the unexpected bonds that form when we least expect them, whether between different species, different generations, or different visions of how the world should work. And in a small Montana town that had once been known for little more than its proximity to better-known destinations, a new understanding took root, that the boundaries we create, whether between wildlife and domestication, science and sentiment, or past and future, are often the very limitations we must transcend to discover the most important truths about our shared world. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Shadow and the Lynx family of Pine Valley has touched your heart. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of unlikely bonds and unexpected connections, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life's surprising relationships. What unlikely connections have you witnessed in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'll be reading them and might even feature your story in an upcoming episode.